talk about today communication skills. We're going to look particularly at conflict communication. What are the characteristics of conflict communication? And then we're going to pay attention to what is the responsibility of a third-party neutral sitting in a mediation for communication skills, monitoring conflict communication as well as modeling good communication. So let's start with a definition. Definition of mediation. The empowering of two parties or number of parties, people, to make an informed decision in their own best interest. So the goal here in communication skills is the empowerment and create a circumstance so that informed decisions can be made in people's best interest. There are circumstances or the characteristics of a conflict communication that will not allow empowering or not allow informed decision making taking place in necessarily anybody's best interest. So the responsibility of a third-party neutral here in paying attention to what's happening with the flow and focus of communication is to model good communication so that this might be accomplished, empowering people so that they can make an informed decision in their own best interest. Let's look at communication in general, not just any kind of communication, not necessarily conflict communication. Because communication is difficult. We know this chart tells us 55% of communication has nothing to do with the words, has everything to do with your presence, the way your body communicates what message you're sending. Your words may be saying one thing, your body could be saying something else. 38% of communication is voice tone, intonation, timing, all these things. So the majority, 97% of communication has nothing to do with the words that you use. Only 7% have anything with the meaning of the actual words you pick. Everything else is your presence in front of this person. It's actually a full body experience. Your actually external behavior, so that communication is as much seeing as it is hearing. So communication circle would look something like this. Your external behavior is communicating to someone. You're sending signals, messages. Even when you're not saying a word, you're communicating to somebody. How you stand, your eyes, your head, all sorts of things. So what messages are you sending? What is your presence communicating? Whatever it is, it creates an internal response then by that party. They're receiving this. They are seeing and hearing what you're communicating, but they're filtering it through a number of different filters. Their own personal experience, issues of gender, issues of geography, culture, age, class, economic status, all sorts of things create filters for receiving what they're seeing and hearing. So what you project, what you think you may be communicating, the filters you're using to create the external behavior may not have anything to do with the way in which they're receiving your external behavior. So they have this internal response, and then what do? They communicate back. Even if they don't say a word, their body language, again, could communicate something. That creates their external behavior, which creates now you an internal response. But you are filtering their behavior through your series of filters. So what they're communicating back to you based on what they thought they heard you say may not be anything near what they wanted to communicate because you're filtering it. And what do you do then? You respond back with your external behavior, and now they receive it and respond. So communication is complicated in and of itself. When you add conflict to the situation, communication becomes even more complicated. Let's look at some of the characteristics of conflict communication. One of the characteristics, the person becomes the problem. A circumstance, situation arises, let's say at work, I'm an employee and my supervisor has failed to give me my leave. And now I'm in a circumstance situation, I didn't get to leave the time I wanted to for vacation, or the appointment I needed to go to, I'm stuck in traffic for whatever reason. Now I'm angry. My life has become more complicated. Circumstances have gone different than what I wanted them to. Why? because my supervisor didn't give me my leave. Who's the problem here? My supervisor. Had my supervisor been competent, caring, at all interested in doing a good managerial job, I would have had my leave. So the problem here is this supervisor. The way they think, their attitude, their competency. You know, they need training. Maybe some diversity training. Maybe some communication training. Maybe they should take some management training. Let's change that person. I perceive now the person to become the problem. And what I'm intent on doing is changing that person. My language, my attitude, my voice tone, my body language. There's something wrong with you, or I wouldn't be in this mess. The communication then turns out to be something that pounds the other person, trying to change them, mold them into something different, something they're not. And so every intent, every word, every barb is to raise their consciousness that they're not good enough and they need to change. I've focused the problem as being the person, and I can't separate the two. Good communication, and the thing that a mediator needs to be doing in this situation, sensitive to the dynamics of the communication at the table, needs to create a circumstance and facilitate flow and focus to be able to separate those two. Separate the person from the problem. Second characteristic we want to talk about, an imbalanced personal state. Now notice, I didn't say imbalanced emotional state. That's usually the stereotype people come to a conflict. That in any kind of a conflict, people become emotional, irrational. When actually, we operate in a decision-making process out of a balanced state between the emotions and the intellect. We want both of them to be present. If not, we could be suspect or concerned necessarily about a decision that is made out of an imbalanced state. Let's look at what an imbalanced state can do. In an imbalanced personal state, somebody, it depends on who you are, somebody ends up pushing something out. They might push out the emotions, and they become very intellectual. I don't know if you've ever sat in a situation or been in a conflict with a person on the other side. It's very calm, cool, and collected, but everything they're asking for, you realize if you consent to, is designed to hurt you. So it's not just, you don't have to be worried about necessarily the irrational or the emotional people. You've got to be also cautious of the super rational people because they've pushed the emotions out. Their decision-making process isn't out of a balanced state. We don't want people making decisions out of this imbalance. We want to recreate the balance somehow. The other person, the other form of imbalance, someone pushes the intellect out and becomes very emotional. Their emotions are ruling the day. They're upset. They're frustrated. They're not listening to anything. They're just all confused in their emotions. We don't want them making decisions out of this imbalanced state either. The difficulty is that many of the problem-solving models that we employ in management schools today and we employ in conflicts resolutions are motivated by time concerns. We want to get this problem out of the way. We want to get these people back on the workplace floor. We've got to increase productivity. We've got to make this thing go away as fast as possible because money's at stake or production's at stake for whatever reason. Unfortunately, with a problem-solving model that's based on getting this taken care of as quickly as possible, we create a circumstance where people are making decisions out of an imbalanced state. Now imagine if a couple of hours later or a couple of days later, when they reestablish that balance, they think back on what's happened, what they've agreed to, are they happy? If we're not careful, we end up creating more problems than we started with by having people making decisions in an imbalanced personal state. Not only are they unhappy with the decision they made, they feel like they were manipulated into it. They're still frustrated and angry at the other person, and now they're mad at you for coming up with this idea. We have to create a circumstance based upon modeling good communication, based upon facilitating flow and focus, to recreate a balanced state. So what may be necessary is a time of venting. Venting is a way to reassert the balance. We want to remove that pressure that's pushing out one or the other, the emotions or the intellect. And by creating the circumstance of allowing the venting, that pressure lowers and we can recreate that balanced state. We want people making decisions here. So we may have to create a circumstance where venting in safe space is allowed. So we can have venting, I can allow venting, and if I am facilitating the flow and focus, it can be safe space. Let's look at another characteristic of conflict communication. The person can become the problem, an imbalanced personal state, and the third one, a single solution mindset. You see, the reason we have a conflict here isn't because we don't have a solution. It's not that we don't have a workable solution. Conflict isn't the result of a lack of a solution. Conflict is the fact that each party, each person, each group on the side of the table has a solution. They've come to this table with a single solution they are convinced will make this thing go away, will benefit them, will be the best possible solution for this situation. The problem is the person on the other side of the table also has a solution that they think is best for this situation. The conflict is they don't agree on the solution. What we don't need in this situation, and what's going to hinder communication, is for a third-party neutral to walk in with yet another solution. Remember, the goal here in the communication is to empower people to make an informed decision in their own best interest. You're not a problem solver here. If you step in as a problem solver, great. Now we've got 3 solutions on the table instead of 2. You might be contributing to the conflict rather than moving it in a direction of empowerment and resolution. Single solution mindset. So we have to find techniques, ways to facilitate flow and focus that will effectively deal with all 3 of these. Let's look at some of the techniques you can use that can help you facilitate flow and focus. The first one, use reflective listening. That's important because the 2 people or the parties at this table end up communicating in a way that diminishes or dismisses the other person. They're not paying attention. They don't want to hear what the other solution is. They've got a solution. They're going to make theirs work, and they're going to change that other person to accept their solution and position. You using reflective listening can create empowerment by valuing what the other people are saying. Well, let me see if I understand this. So you can use summary, you can use paraphrasing to quickly reflect back, to let parties know, hey, someone at this table is listening. You're modeling good communication. Paraphrasing, summarizing. So they're talking back and forth, it gets a little heated. I can step in and say, excuse me, just for a minute. Let me see if I can capture where we are. Let me see if I can summarize for a moment and see if I've gotten a clear understanding of what's going on. First thing we've talked about is, okay, I've broken up the flow of the communication and created an opportunity to focus on myself, and then after my summary, I can turn around and ask a question. Exploring their understanding is another technique that I can use, a probing into the details, the depth of what they're describing. If one side of the table, or if both sides of the table, are easily dismissing what the other person is saying, when I explore their understanding, I am investing value in what they're saying. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean I agree with their perspective. I don't even have to consent that it's a good idea what their perspective is, or if it's even healthy. What I am communicating to them is I'm interested in their perspective. Tell me more about. Describe for me what happened when. Tell me more about the policies. Tell me more about the office, the practices, anything to dive deeper, probe wider in terms of what their understanding, their perspective is. Good communication modeling. I can combine the 2 of these. I can step in the midst of the communication. I'm going to facilitate the flow and the focus. Excuse me for a moment. Let me interrupt. Let me summarize and see if I understand where we are so far, and tell me if I've got it right. A, B, C. Okay. Now, I had a question about C. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about what I've effectively done is interrupted bad flow of communication, changed the focus back to me, and then by asking a question, I've directed the focus where I want it to go. I can model communication. By doing that, effectively deal with ways of separating the person from the problem, effectively deal with balance in terms of allowing venting to take place. I can interrupt if it gets damaging or dangerous, and I can refocus and redirect. Let's look at a third characteristic. Third technique we can use is recognizing feelings and emotions. They're going to be there. And it often can help the communication process by naming them, identifying them, dragging them on the table, and telling people, I can see that this is frustrating to you. Modeling good communication. I can see that this is a difficult situation for everybody. By naming it and identifying it, we can put it on the table. It can neutralize it a little bit, and if need be, we can talk about those feelings and those emotions. That can add to the venting process. That can add to the valuing process. The I'm being listened to, I'm being heard, that can help the flow of communication and recreate a balanced personal state. Fourth technique, find things to validate. Again, the communication is often dismissive, diminishing. By you finding things to validate, you're affirming the other person. Oh, it's interesting you should say that. I wonder if you could say, I'm really interested in what you mentioned earlier. I wonder if you could expand on that a little more. I'm really appreciative that you're taking the time to share this with me. I want to thank you both for being here today. I can see this is difficult. You're working hard. I have a question. Notice, I've validated them. I've given them value. I've recognized feelings. This is difficult and hard. And then I went straight into a question. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about. By combining these characteristics, I become the facilitator of the communication, and I model for them communication they themselves can do eventually as maybe they move out of this conflict communication that they're using. Next one, identify positive request. Inside every demand, there's a positive request. Usually demands come across as negative. They want something to change or somebody to change. The most classic illustration is someone who walks in the room and goes, gee, it's always cold in here. What are they asking for? They're asking for the temperature to be changed. They walked in and made a negative comment about it's always cold in here. But if you can learn to identify positive requests in each demand, communication facilitation will go much smoother. This is a little bit more difficult skill to master, but if you do, it will become incredibly effective in any conflict communication situation. So a supervisor says, well, your office is always messy. You're the most disorganized person in the entire department. So you would like to have an organized office. You work better under circumstances with organized people. Notice, we've taken the focus off of the person they're targeting, redirected the focus back on them, and identified a positive request. The more you can do this, the smoother things will go. It takes practice, though, to develop this one, and use it as many times as you can, because it can help facilitate and model good communication. Your number one tool as a facilitator of flow and focus is the ability to ask questions. That's what we're going to do. And those questions have to be about the task of paying attention to the flow and focus. What I want to do with my questions is watch how the two parties are communicating. Once it starts to get heated, once it turns red, I need to be about facilitating that flow. I'm going to step in. I'm going to use one of my 5 techniques: summarize, paraphrase, probe, something like that, validate, identify the feelings, look for a positive request. But ultimately what I'm trying to do is redirect the focus to me for a moment. Get it off of them in a heated situation. Get it on me. I can redirect and refocus for them. I'm going to do that by asking those questions. But I have to be careful with the questions I ask. The questions have to have the right tone. You want to have a tone that is exploratory. You want to, by all means, communicate sincerity and inquisitiveness. Stay away from rhetorical questions. Well, did you really think you would get away with that? It's a question, all right? But it's not the right kind of question. It has the wrong tone, and it's going to create the wrong atmosphere. It's bad communication. You want to ask those kind of questions that will model good communication, communicate interest, communicate more information, and you're not modeling diminishing or dismissing. So it's got to be sincere and you really want to know. Tell me more about how that was for you. Tell me more about what goes on in this office. Tell me more. Use that tone. Practice that tone. The next thing you need to be concerned about is your timing. Don't interrupt and don't interrogate. Don't interrupt. There is a communication style out there that's best intention is to communicate to the other party that we're on the same page. We're communicating. The result of that is cutting off the last part of the other person's sentence. Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Oh, I know what you're going to say. And the intent is that we're on the same wavelength. But ultimately what it's doing is interrupting. And some people do not feel good about having their words cut off, about being interrupted. It doesn't communicate that I'm listening to you, which is what you need to have here. So don't interrupt. Let the person finish the sentence, put a period on it, and to really communicate listening, pause for a moment, and then go into, well, let me summarize. Let me see if I can capture this another way. Let me see if I can grasp what you said. Let me reflect back what I heard you say. Okay? Don't interrupt, and don't interrogate. The timing of your questions will become very sensitive. If you start rapid firing off a series of questions to one person, it could create an atmosphere of interrogation. Now, we would expect that from the other party in conflict to do. Interrogate, fire off a bunch of questions, one right after the other. If that takes place, you need to step in and facilitate the flow. If you're doing it, then now suddenly the conversation becomes heated between you and the party. There's no one there to model good communication. That's your job. So watch the timing. Don't rapid fire off a bunch of questions in just one direction. Balance the direction. Pay attention to how your communication is flowing. So by using good questions, by using the 5 communication skill techniques, you can begin to separate the person from the problem by asking those good questions. You can create a safe space and control the venting so that it's not damaging to either party. And you can begin to shift them, move them out of that single solution mindset by listening, paying attention, modeling good communication. Try these things. They'll work for you.